In terms of what we're talking about here, though, there's a different point that I think is evident in many of those who founded the theological institutions we know today. And we're a part of the discussion in which the Greek language, especially along with Latin, was prerequisite. James Pettigrew Boyce, when Southern Seminary was established, he gave an address in 1856 entitled Three Changes in Theological Institutions. And one of the ones he mentioned was that in order to get into one of the theological seminaries such as Princeton or a similar school, one had to have 12 years of Latin and 10 years of classical Greek. And he made the point, thus not one of the 12 disciples could have been admitted to one of the theological seminaries in the United States. But later in John A. Broadus, there's another very interesting argument that I think is really helpful, in which he said, remember, you're not actually studying a language to study a language. You're studying a language to study a text. And the text is the issue. And I think that's one of the dangers in this discussion. People hear us talking about languages as if linguistics is our main concern. It is the knowledge of the text that is our main concern. You want to elaborate on that?
Well, I simply want to say that that's why the languages are important, because pastors want to focus on Scripture. And there's so much to read today, and there's so much out there that's helpful and illuminating, but the focus, the foundation, the emphasis must be on Scripture. Studying Scripture, meditating on Scripture, and I think that includes the languages, having a discipline to focus on the languages. There's exceptions, certainly, but I think it's the focus of an evangelical pastoral ministry.
My dad had the equivalent of a BTH, but at a time when a BTH gave you 3 years of Greek and 2 years of Hebrew. And he was a church planter in French Canada, and he kept sporadic diaries all his life. I used them when I wrote the little book, Memoirs of an Ordinary Pastor. But as I read through his diaries, what's so interesting is that he quotes the Bible constantly, usually from memory. And when he's writing in English, he wrote his diary partly in English, partly in French. Then he'd quote the King James Version, that's what was used then. And then when he was quoting in French, then he'd use the Louis II, which was what was used then. But often when he was quoting Scripture, he might use those languages, but he might quote in Greek and sometimes in Hebrew. I have a lovely passage from when he was about 78. My mother had died, and he was on his own again, and he was preaching again. And he has this long passage that he's quoted from memory. I can tell because he's got a few errors in it, that he's quoted from 1 John in Greek. And his mind is so full of Scripture from a pretty humble background, but he was so much committed to the Word that it stamped him. And that's what you want to get. You want to get this lifelong commitment to the Word. He would never become a linguistic expert, but he loved the Bible.